Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to whichever Pinkin channel this happens to find you on. Connor Southwell, joined by Paddy, Davitt. We're going to spend the next half an hour or so talking about Dean Smith's press conference today, which of course he did ahead of that big Premier League game tomorrow away at Newcastle United. Also answering your questions and comments as well, be it about the weekend or any of the selection issues that you may feel particularly pertinent. Given Matthias Norman is out, that's probably a big one. So wherever you're watching this, let us know where you're watching from, ask a question, whatever, and we'll do our best to get through as many as we can in the next half an hour or so. Pads, how are you? It's been a bit of a whirlwind weekend. Today feels a little bit like a Friday, but how are you doing? All good?
Yeah, it does feel a bit strange. Premier League midweek is very few and far between. Well, it has been, but I know there's a few between now and Christmas. But a bit of a championship vibe today. Yeah, a Monday touch point with the Norwich head coach, albeit still remotely. He's at Colney. We're down the end of a Zoom lens, but it's they're coming thick and fast now, and this feels, as we'll get into in due course, a big game for a lot of reasons. Principal among them is their respective positions in the league table. You know, Norwich win tomorrow night and Newcastle 6 points clear, and even at this early stage, that's a healthy cushion. So it's a really intriguing game in store tomorrow. But the mood from the man who matters, Mr. Smith, very bullish, and certainly there'll be no fear or lack of belief from his group of players on the Tyneside tomorrow night. So Norman is a blow, obviously, but Lucas Rupp came in and did a more than passable impression of a central midfielder, didn't he, on Saturday? So I don't think that's going to derail them too much. It's just a really, really intriguing game in store, I think.
Yeah, it is. If you spot me looking around at any point, it's because I'm in this room with a 5-month-old kitten, and there's also a Christmas tree. So that could be a recipe for disaster. We'll see how it goes, but I'm hoping he behaves himself. He's kind of settling down for a sleep. So hopefully,
there's one or two. I'm just looking at the comments, and one or two have already commented on the Christmas vibe at your gaff, as opposed to the lack of Christmas vibe at my gaff. You've got a kitten. I've got an 18-month-old. It would be wrecking the joint if there was a 6-foot tree anywhere. So the longer I can delay it, the better, mate.
This has been up about a week. Not my decision, by the way. Not my decision. I want to make that very, very clear. It wouldn't be up until December if it was up to me. But there you go. It's up, and once it's up, it's very hard to take down. But anyway, back to the football then, Pad. As we were talking about, and some interesting stuff from Dean Smith today in terms of that midfield mix. Obviously, Norman missing out tomorrow, as we said, with that pelvic issue. He's going to see a specialist, but Dean Smith didn't particularly give the impression that he felt that was going to be particularly long term. Do you think he'll stick with Lucas Rupp? I got from his comments today that maybe you would, although there were some interesting shout outs for two players in particular.
Yeah, one of whom was Pierre-Lise Milot, who, to be fair, he referenced him post-match Saturday when I asked him about Rupp's performance and said that Lise Milot had been pushing quite hard in training, and today we got another, and that was Jacob Sorensen. So he is still alive, Norwich fans, even though we haven't seen too much of him, / nothing at all really in terms of a match day environment. But clearly another one who's caught his eye, although that is, pretty clever management really, isn't it? That, ultimately I think it will be Rupp, given how well he performed on Saturday. But keeping that group as tight as they can together, that's definitely the case with the guys who aren't really playing and aren't really getting a look in. He also referenced today Ozan Kabak, who's fit and available, just not able to make the squad at the minute. Andrew Omobamidele is the one he's got on the bench as backup to Hanley and Gibson. So, yeah, I thought one or two of them references were maybe just to, let those players know, maybe through the art of the media and social media, that I'm seeing what you're doing. You're part of this trip, and we need you to stay on board with it, because ultimately, as has been proven, you cannot rely on the players who he's trusted so far all being fit and well through this congested swing of games. And if there are players not available, as is Matthias tomorrow night, you do need others to step in. And Dean Smith clearly feels, I think, without wanting to pick his team for him, that Lucas Rupp did enough on Saturday to retain his place. So he's got an opportunity now for however long that is. And I guess maybe what that might, thinking about it, might do is it opens up a spot on the bench ultimately. And does Jacob come into Dean Smith's thinking in terms of getting a place on the bench? So we'll find out tomorrow, obviously. But it is a blow not to be without. Well, to be without Matthias Norman. But not a huge blow, I don't think, because I think Lucas Rupp is experienced enough now and is able to slot in there and do a job that is required of him. But yeah, you wouldn't really want to be without Matthias Norman for any length of time. And as Dean again called him today, he's a super player. We've all seen how important he can be to this Norwich team. And the quicker he's back, the better, I think, because what you don't want now, particularly when it feels like they've got some momentum going and a little bit of belief as well, and of course, 4 points from 2 games, you don't want that to be disrupted or blown off course a little bit by injuries to key players for any length of time. And, heaven forbid, I think we might have mentioned it on the pod Saturday night, if Temu Pukki got an injury or was out for any length of time, that would be a huge concern. And, maybe way things are going if Billy Gilmour was unavailable, because he's looked reasonably impressive, or Rashica, the first game and a half of Smith's reign, he looks a standout attacking option. So, yeah, let's just hope that it is an isolated case in terms of Matthias's availability for tomorrow, and that he's back as soon as possible.
Yeah, just we're not going to really talk about the centre backs today. We spoke about that in the last one that we did on Friday at great length. But it was interesting today to hear Dean Smith add that he didn't really want 2 centre backs on the bench, which is a slightly different approach to Daniel Farke, which is why we're not seeing Ozan Kabak at the moment, because of how well Grant Hanley, Ben Gibson have done, and then the space on the bench is Andrew Omobamidele. So that maybe shows maybe an interesting view, I suppose, of how Smith ranks the centre backs that he has at the moment. Of course, Crystal Sinman to come back into the fold as well. But in terms of that midfield mix, then Pad, if we're going to look ahead tomorrow, and we'll discuss the game in a bit more detail later on, but just purely on that midfield three, would you expect it to be basically the way that we saw Norwich play for 55 minutes that Lucas Rupp was on the pitch, where he had Billy Gilmour actually as the holding midfielder, which we spoke about so much at the start of the season, and whether that really worked. But he looked pretty impressive in that role on Saturday, with then Kenny McLean and Lucas Rupp flanking him either side. Is that the three that you see Dean Smith starting with tomorrow?
Yeah, I can't see him wanting to disrupt things too much, because in these 2 games, maybe 1.5, if you exclude that opening 45 against Southampton, you really start to see a cohesion with them without the ball. And even with Norman going out and Lucas Rupp going in, that didn't disrupt materially how Norwich looked to play the game and press high and congest the space and get players like Rashica and the fullbacks on the half-turn running at opposition defences from a high starting position. So, yeah, I think you want minimal disruption, because ultimately, I know we're focusing on Norwich here, but, Newcastle are very much a work in progress. Eddie Howe, first time in the dugout on Saturday at Arsenal, they've lost the game. Tomorrow's a big night for him as a new manager going into a new ownership structure. There'll be a lot of anticipation amongst that crowd, that home crowd, and players keen to impress him, as players have been keen to impress Dean Smith. So, yeah, I think if you're Dean Smith, you're now dealing in kind of as much certainties as you can muster in terms of your selection and how you put those players together. And I don't see him massively disrupting what we've already seen. So for me, yeah, I think it will be the 3 you've mentioned. I think it'll be Gilmour, and then either side Rupp and McLean. Although if it's anything like the Kenny McLean from Saturday's second half, there'll be about 3 Kenny McLeans on the pitch, because that man was everywhere.
Yeah, he could run to Newcastle, couldn't he? If he's still in the form of Saturday, it was quite something. I'm actually writing a bit about Lucas Rupp as we speak. I'm not going to spoil it too much, but we speak about chance creation. Some of his statistics from that perspective from Saturday's game are quite impressive. So that's an interesting element. And I suppose you also have the legs that those two offer you. They really want to go and press, as you hinted at McLean there. They really want to go and engage midfields high up, which we know is something that Dean Smith wants to do. So yeah, I would be inclined to agree with you. Just away from the on the pitch stuff at the moment, there was an interesting anecdote that Dean Smith shared with you this morning about a dinner. I think there was a picture that Darren Huckabee posted yesterday. It would actually look pretty good. Actually, it was a Sunday roast of sorts, but a lot more posh than say I'd get served up on the table that I'm sat at. Not to do anyone a disservice, but Dean Smith was also there. It was a surprise 25th anniversary to celebrate Delia Smith, Michael Wynne-Jones and Michael Folger's reign at the club. Some interesting characters that were involved, Pad. I'll let you list off some of the names, but one in particular, yeah.
One in particular was a very eye-catching attendee on the guest list, P. Lambert, no less, who, his last visit here, well, certainly in a professional capacity, was with his head in his hands at the top of the City Stand director's box, having been sent off for, dare we mention them, Ipswich Town, in that derby defeat. certainly hasn't been back in a professional capacity since, but he was back and in Norfolk yesterday, and I was very, very pleased to hear that, because ultimately, we all know about the pantomime villain episode, and even, if you want to go further back, and it's pertinent with Dean Smith and the Villa connection, how that ended for Lambert at Norwich. But I don't think anybody, maybe to draw a parallel with Daniel, and in time, and probably not as much time as it would take with the Lambert era, but people will look back on that, and that guy at that period did an unbelievable job, galvanised those respective squads, took supporters on this unbelievable journey. Very similar parallels, Lambert, obviously the 2 back-to-back promotions and then into the Premier League, and kept Norwich up that first season. Farke, we know what happened there, back and forth between the top 2 tiers. But ultimately, there's not been a lot of love lost between Lambert and Norwich since. I mean, I remember being in a press conference after not the most recent game. Actually, it was, funny enough, because he did come down and do his media, and it was, people have short memories, I think was his quote, referring to...
Well, maybe they're not as short as he thinks, if he's getting invited back for 25th anniversary dinners.
The people handing out invites that clearly do remember and valued what he did, and Culverhouse and Karza and Holt and Martin, John Ruddy, who was back obviously with Wolves at the weekend, and that era, a very special time. And I think that's great to see that he was back. Martin O'Neill was here yesterday, Chrissy Houghton, Nigel Worthington. I don't think Dee Farke was there. One or two have asked me about that. I don't think there's probably not enough water flowing under that particular bridge yet. But Johnny Howson as well got in the car from Middlesbrough, headed down. You've referenced Huckabee. We know Zimbo was there as well, speaking on behalf of the current squad. Just as Dean Smith said, him and Shakespeare were invited, and to see that up close, it just underlines again, in his view, Norwich are a special club, and not every club would value their former players and coaches and staff in quite the same regard. And there's a lot of people maybe outside of Norfolk want to look down at Norwich and Norwich City and what they're all about, but their values and how they're rooted in the community, I think, does set them apart. And on a personal human level, it is for me great if Lambert is being integrated a little bit, albeit it might take a bit longer with a few supporters who probably won't forgive that he pitched up just over the border. But what isn't disputed is that the time he was here, he did an unbelievable job and really galvanised the club, as Daniel Farke did more recently. So, I'd love to have been there myself personally, but our invites got lost, Connor.
Yeah, I was going to say some of the conversations must have been absolutely fascinating between a lot of people and Paul Lambert, but also between obviously the current head coach and I suppose managers of years gone by. Martin O'Neill there as well. Johnny Howson come down from Middlesbrough is an incredible effort, especially given we're going to do a similar journey tomorrow. I mean, that's some effort, isn't it, to come down all the way from up there. So that's good to see. Right, back to the football then, Pad. Tomorrow's game, I know Dean Smith was very keen to downplay it as any head coach would. It feels like, maybe not in terms of how the season will go, because there's still so many games left, but just in terms of the momentum that Norwich City have at the moment. If they do lose tomorrow, it's going to feel a little bit like a balloon being popped, isn't it? Compared to maybe the last couple of weeks, which have been about optimism and confidence building, and Norwich City looking like a much more effective Premier League team on the pitch.
Yeah, there'll be an element of that, but I think we've seen enough in terms of credit in the bank, not just the 4 points in the bank account in terms of points tallies, but the way these seemingly same group of players look transformed under this head coach and his assistant, and I think the underlying sort of principles they're putting in place and the belief you can see, I think that will withstand whatever the outcome tomorrow night. But of course, you don't really want to give a club who are in a similar transitional phase, new management, new ownership for Newcastle. You don't really want to give them a leg up there yet to win a Premier League game. And the longer that goes on, the better for Norwich, certainly, because much is made of their spending power. But I thought it was interesting at today's press conference. Dean Smith was asked about, can you see Newcastle going and in a very difficult January trading window, going and radically improving that squad? Yes, they've got plenty of money, but are the players they need, going to be available and be willing to go there, even if they could throw all sorts of money at them? So I don't think by any stretch are Newcastle going to buy their way out of trouble if they can get to January. So the longer it takes them to turn it around, the better from Norwich's perspective, because the league table tells you they are a direct rival, purely in terms of staying in this division this season. So for those reasons, it feels a bigger game because you're playing against, one of the potential clubs who are going to be down there fighting with you for the rest of the season. But, irrespective of the result tomorrow, I think we'll certainly see a Norwich team who will be very willing to engage. And as Dean Smith said, respect but no fear. And, that's a very refreshing change. And I think we've seen that in the first 2 games already. And there certainly is nothing to fear, because if you can go toe-to-toe with a team like Wolves, who are 5 wins in 7 and in the top 6 at kick-off on Saturday, and really limit them to pretty much nothing in terms of Tim Krul and the work he had to do, then what is there to fear about? Okay, it's away from home and all the hullabaloo around the Newcastle situation. We know they've got 1 or 2 very good players. Of course, Sam Maximan is the one who stands out. He's a phenomenal player on his day. But, they're down there with 6 points after 12, 13 games for a reason, because they haven't been good enough. And Norwich really want to go there and underline that point. And if they, for me, it's okay. We can look on the negative elements, but I'm looking on the positive now. If they go there and get a draw, or even better, a win, what does that say about where Norwich are heading under this head coach? To that'd be 4 unbeaten, one of those under Daniel, obviously. But I've seen 1 or 2 people on social pointing out, if they were to get the result tomorrow, I think technically, looking at my calendar, it's the last game in November. Despite Norwich making a managerial change, I think they would be very close to being in the running for managers or coaches of the month. But how they'd split that award, I don't know. But that would underline, wouldn't it, ultimately, that if Dean Smith goes to Newcastle, gets another result, this really does feel like quite a seismic change in terms of where Norwich can pitch their ambitions this season, from hoping against hope to be competitive to we can actually stay up and maybe push on a little bit further. So, I guess I'm loath to sort of label it with a 6-pointer and these things, but it's more the emotional side and the mood and how that could shift from what happens tomorrow. But in the bigger picture, I think we just, irrespective of the result tomorrow, you just have to see what we've seen with our own eyes in these 2 Carrow Road games, that this is a group of players now under a head coach who know what they're doing and know what it takes. And of course, they're going to be the odd setback along the way. I thought it was also interesting that somebody pointed out to Dean that purely in terms of playing a team round about you in the table, that's why it's important tomorrow, because if you look at Norwich's upcoming fixtures in December, there's some very, very tough-looking fixtures. And as a result, Newcastle might be a very good opportunity to pick up some points.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I know you've picked out the positive elements. Maybe it's in my nature to look at negatively. I'm not sure, but I'm just thinking in terms of, this is going to be the first time that Eddie Howe's going to be in the dugout. Obviously, he had that coronavirus diagnosis, didn't he? That robbed him of that game against Brentford in charge. The fans are going to be up for it, as they always are at St James's Park. The flip side to that is, if you can frustrate them, then they do turn. I mean, we saw even in the friendly for a little bit, they turned, didn't they? So. When Dean Smith speaks about quieting down the atmosphere, then that's it. And you would expect them to come out all guns blazing, I suppose, in the first 20 minutes or so. But if Norwich can kind of stem the tide a little bit and just keep themselves in the game and frustrate, then who knows, opportunities may advance themselves a little bit. Plenty of questions coming in, which we'll answer in just a moment. But it's interesting in terms of how this game is packaged, because you're right, Pad. People can look at it. It's 19th against 20th. It's a relegation 6-pointer. But realistically, if Norwich could come away from this game with a point, and maybe not massive in the grand scheme of things, but would just retain that 3-point distance they have between themselves and Newcastle, it's probably fair to say that all of those must-win comments, 6-pointer comments, they're probably being pushed in Newcastle's direction, aren't they, at the moment? Given this is Eddie Howe's first game, it feels like maybe there's more pressure in their camp than in Norwich's, because they're the home team, there's a new manager, they haven't won yet this season. Those 3 elements alone are going to put pressure on them. If Norwich can go there and get a result, then ultimately it just keeps them ticking along. Yeah,
and for me, every time I've gone to St James's, I don't know whether this is, that hangover from the Keegan era and that how passionate and how supportive that crowd is. Whenever I've gone there, they're very quick to turn. And, I saw an interview with Alan Shearer the other day with Gary Neville, and more or less talking about 10 or 14 years of misery under the previous owner and nothing to look forward to, no hope, nothing to grasp onto. And we all can see, you don't have to be in and around Newcastle, that, is the religion up there. There's one bit like Norwich, one club, one professional club for the area, black and white shirts everywhere you go in Newcastle. It is more than a football club, and maybe that kind of desperation almost bleeds into the lack of patience that every time I've ever been there seems to be shown towards the playing staff or whoever the coach is in the dugout at the time. Because ultimately, let's be honest, they will see Norwich turning up there tomorrow, and they will think Norwich is a team that they should be rolling over, and that's just the way they will look at it. So if Norwich are obdurate and start well and keep that crowd quiet, as Dean talked about liberally today, then I've got no doubt that they will start to get on the backs of those players. And Dean also said that when you're playing in front of those massive supports, he obviously had it to a degree at Villa Park, that if there is a bit of anxiety and a bit of a sense that things aren't going quite well, a misplaced pass from a home player, the crowd straight on them, that actually feeds into the players on the pitch there. They can sense that mood turning in the stadium. And yes, while you can be sure that I'm sure they'll stage manage and Eddie Howe, as Dean Smith did before Southampton, appearing maybe 5 minutes before kickoff on the pitch and waving to the home supporters and galvanising the support. I'm sure he's saying the right things in the media today, and we need you on side and those type of sound bites. But ultimately, if Norwich, even better, if Norwich get their noses in front, wait for that reaction then, because like I say, they, as we can see, their situation at the minute, and if it doesn't turn quickly, then, as much as Norwich found prior to these last 2 or 3 games, when you get cut adrift, it looks a long way back to 17th, let alone, anything higher than that. And quite simply, a club with their reported wealth now, languishing in the Championship is not part of the plan, I'm sure. And even taking a step back for one season, as they did maybe in years gone by under Houghton, who brought them straight back, that very much isn't in the plan. So it is clearly imperative they stay in the Premier League this season before whatever else happens there on Tyneside. So tomorrow is the first opportunity for him to get some of those fans on side if you're Eddie Howe. And I think there's a massive opportunity here for Norwich to make it as uncomfortable as possible, because, as I say, every time I've ever been there with Norwich, the periods where Norwich have managed to get on top a little bit, the home crowd get very restless very soon, and anything of that nature would be music to Dean Smith's ears tomorrow, and the Norwich players, of course.
Absolutely. We'll go into comments in a moment. I just want to ask you about Milot Rashica very quickly. We spoke about him on our podcast, which people can listen to. It's on our YouTube channel. It's on any podcast provider that you guys listen to. But Dean Smith was interesting on him today, wasn't he? You asked him if it was just a slight tactical tweak that maybe has gotten out of him what we've seen out of him in the last 2 games, which has been very promising, particularly so on Saturday, where Semedo, I'd imagine, probably still looking for him, to be honest. He was causing absolute chaos on that left-hand side. A performance like that tomorrow, especially given what we know now, Jamal Lascelles is going to be out, Matt Ritchie is going to be out for Newcastle, 2 real leaders defensively for them. If we get the Milot Rashica that we saw on Saturday, that's a really exciting prospect, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, just missing, and he should have had an assist really if Lucas Rupp had put his foot through that chance that he cut back to him. But he's just missing that end product now in the positive column, and whether that's an assist or a goal, because everything else about his general game now, and it clearly, quite clearly, I mean, Dean Smith, I think, more wanted to attribute it to just a bit of more confidence, and of course he's having to adapt to English football and England as a country. He's got a very young family. I think they had a second arrival baby, didn't they, since arriving in Norwich. So all of those factors are in play in terms of feeling comfortable in your surroundings. But there's no doubt under Dean Smith, and under possibly Dean Smith's second half onwards at Southampton, when he did switch him to the left-hand side, and you've got Brandon Williams behind you offering a bit of that defensive protection, in a team who are conditioned or programmed now to try and press high, win the ball high up, and if you can get Rashica on the turn deep in opposition territory where he can actually run at defenders, there's carnage to unfold there in a positive manner. And Dean Smith said, actually just popped into my head, that chance that he cut inside, I think he took a diagonal pass from Max second half Saturday and then whipped it near post, and it just quite kind of brushed the side net in a very low effort on his right-hand side. And Dean Smith made it quite clear that, having looked back at the tapes, he didn't think their keeper was getting that if it had just been inside the post. And that's all it's going to take, I think, is you just need to get that first goal, and then we'll see even more from him, because there's no doubt we're now beginning to see possibly why Norwich went and spent the money they did. He was just their biggest summer signing in terms of financial outlay, and a player who 12 months before that, before it went poorly south at Werder Bremen and they got relegated, but big clubs in the Premier League were looking at him. He is a top talent. There's no doubt about it. And if Smith can just extract that final bit of productivity from him, both in goals and assists, what an asset Norwich have got on their hands, no doubt about it. Because he, as you say, and we saw it with Semedo as well, we saw it against Southampton in the second half, when he gets the ball and runs at players at this level, the alarm bells start ringing for opposition defenders. And the more carnage he can cause, then, the likes of Pukki, they're going to get a bit more space. You're going to get, I don't know, on the other side, if Cantwell can get back in the side, or Sargent as it is at the minute, it just opens up the pitch in the final third. If you've got a player who can run and commit multiple defenders, and he certainly can do that. So, yeah, it would be lovely tomorrow night if he could just go that extra yard and get himself on the score sheet, or set somebody else up, because I think that's all really for me now. And I know it's a smallish sample, a game and a half really, but that's all he's really missing, because all the other elements of his game seem to be there now.
Yeah, he's a bit of a throwback, isn't he, in terms of like a classic winger to an extent. And you mentioned the clubs looking at him, one of which was Aston Villa under Dean Smith at that time. It looked, well, pretty good. We'll never know how close it was, but it looked pretty close to getting done at that point. Obviously, it didn't. So he's a player that Dean Smith is aware of and likes, and is seemingly beginning to get the best out of. But we could say that for 5 or 6 players who look collectively like they've improved. Pad, I'm sure you watched Match of the Day at the weekend, as a lot of other Norwich City fans did. There was an interesting bit of analysis that I think Jermaine Jean has done on their conversion rate, which was, I think, 5.19%, lowest in the Premier League. Obviously, probably highlighted more than the 3 big chances, maybe 4 if you want to throw Kieran Dow's cross for Temu Pukki. I'd probably argue against that being a big chance personally, but certainly the one that Max Aarons had, that Pukki had in the second half, and that Lucas Rupp had, really glorious opportunities, which is obviously, I mean, Dean Smith was asked about that today. There's an interesting question that we've had on YouTube about Temu Pukki, and it says, how do you think Pukki is looking physically? He gets chances and goals, but has he lost maybe a little sharpness? And this feels like a question that comes up every time perhaps we see a game that Temu Pukki had a chance in that he squandered or whatever. To me, the big one that he did have, where Lucas Rupp played him in, just didn't look up. I don't think he realised the time he had. I think he thought it was a foot race between him and the keeper, hence why he tried to kind of poke it past. What do you make of Temu Pukki at the moment? I suppose the wider point is the one that Dean Smith touched upon today, which is the over-reliance point more than anything.
Yeah, which is, again, going back to the previous point, you want a Rashica, certainly, and those type of attacking players to chip in, to ease a bit of the burden. You certainly can't rely, as they did 2 seasons ago at this level, as they did quite regularly in the 2 title-winning seasons at the Championship. You can't be over-reliant on Temu Pukki, because he isn't a player in his early 20s who's got it all ahead of him. He's getting to the stage now where he has to be a bit more circumspect, maybe in types of runs and the types of athletic output that he puts into the games. But correct me if I'm wrong, that was his left he went with, wasn't it? The Rupp chance. He tried to poke it with his left, wasn't it? Or was it his right?
I've got in my head it was his right, but I might be wrong. Right.
Because clearly,
watch it back. It was one of them.
Definitely one of them, yeah. But he never convinces for me when he's on that left-hand side. And funnily enough, now it's just popped into my head. This game 2 seasons ago was a 0-0. I remember it, St. James's Premier League, and he had some excellent chances that day. But he was just going through that sad, slow sort of decline from where he'd started the Premier League season, where, of course, first City player since Efan Nkoku to get a top-flight hat-trick, Premier League player of the season, that August, wasn't he? And that was post the foot injury. It got Leicester, and he never looked quite the same again. But yeah, we do periodically have this debate. But I've actually thought the last 2 games under Smith, he has looked quite physically, quite there. I thought he was quite vibrant. His work generally outside the box, closing down defenders. I've seen him in periods in a Norwich shirt where he's been far less convincing in that regard, and I think he is benefiting clearly by a template which is designed to try and win the ball as high up as possible, because then he's got support around him and he's got movement around him and everything's happening at pace. And as we know from him, that's what it's about. It's about him on the last shoulder of centre-backs, slipping balls down the side, as Rupp did for that chance, and him with those perfectly timed runs to get him into shooting positions. He certainly isn't, as we saw him too often in the first part of the season, a player you can hit balls at head height with his back to goal and try and wrestle defenders and lay it off and get in the box. That's so far removed from what Temu Pukki is and has been in the Norwich shirt. So, no, I'll be with Dean Smith. The time to be concerned in terms of more broadly talking about chance conversion is if you don't create the chances and look at the move, look at the header, look at the goal he scored against Southampton. That was a very, very clinical, predatory striker at the top of his game, and that was only the game before. So, he won't want to see that one back again, I'm sure. But I won't be overly concerned that he's maybe in a situation where does he look like he's not able to sort of score goals? I think the way this team is set up now, if they continue to play in this vein in the final third, he will score plenty of goals this season. I'm more confident now than I was when, as I say, he's fighting Shane Duffy with his back to goal against Brighton or Leeds. He's battling with their defenders because that was palpably not what Temu Pukki's all about. You go back to the goal he scored. I know it was a losing effort, but the Watford goal, Matthias Norman, first time clip over the top. He's anticipated it, run through, drawn Foster, right-hand side, bang, it's in the back of the net. And that is still, for me, Temu Pukki will deliver those type of goals if the service around him is where it needs to be, and that is to extract the most out of what we know he's all about.
Yeah, and that could be an element of getting the best out of Rashica as well, isn't it? If they manage to do that, then you may well begin to see the best of Temu Pukki. And as you said there, Norwich engaging teams higher up the pitch, trying to win the ball further up the pitch, may just create the opportunities that Temu Pukki's been lacking in recent weeks. Dean Smith was asked about, again, the kind of overall fitness of the squad, and he said that both he felt and the statistics show that Norwich are in a very good place fitness-wise. And we know Dean Smith likes his strikers to press high, to press early. I think Temu Pukki, as you say, Pad, has done that very well in the last few weeks, but important that other areas begin to chip in with goals. Stephen Noakes says, hey from Virginia, gents. Thank you very much for watching. Stephen, appreciate it. I don't know what the time is over there. I'm not even going to try and work it out unless you do, Pad, but I haven't got that to hand. Maybe Stephen can let us know.
Like 5 or 6 behind, mate. 5 or 6 behind. I'll take a punt.
Good morning, then. In that case, he's just followed up with, I fear Norman might end up being longer term than we would like. He has had to manage this sort of pelvic issue, I think, since he signed. I guess the fear is that he manages it to an extent where it maybe deteriorizes, and then maybe we look at surgery. But I don't think we're at that point yet. And Dean Smith certainly didn't give the impression of a man that was too concerned that he was going to be without him long term. So we shall see. Barry Newman on Facebook has said, I have to say Dean Smith has galvanised the team and is a breath of fresh air. Early days, of course, but I feel no matter whom we face, we have a good chance the intensity is much higher and the opposing team will know they've been in a game. It's interesting, isn't it, Pad? Just very quickly, we were both sat at Dean Smith's first press conference. He set out a pretty sort of hefty list of what he wanted Norwich to improve on. One of those was reducing the chances they created, which I think we've seen. One of those was their work off the ball, which again, I think we've seen. There was one moment or a few moments in the first half of that game against Wolves where Wolves had a throw in their fullback position. Every single Norwich player, with the exception of Tim Krul, was in their half, which was good to see. He wanted to see more chances being created and perhaps being a little bit more consistent. But interestingly, he also said that he wants his teams to be hardworking and tough to play against. And I think we've seen that in the first 2 games of his reign, haven't we?
Oh, 100%, yeah. I mean, and wrapped around reducing the amount of chances that the opposition are going to get, which, pre-Brentford, we can all see, the results tell you the amount of goals Norwich were leaking. They were far too porous individually, collectively. The structure was all over the place without the ball. And that very definitely has been a priority for Shakespeare and Smith. And as he said again today, he said after the game Saturday, what did Tim Krul have to do in terms of saves? Really, there was the hairy moment with the Grant Hanley back pass. Other than that, I don't remember him really having to pull anything out in terms of shot stopping. And that's a team who were, as I say, one of, if not the, form side in the Premier League at kickoff. If you can do that against a team as good as that with brilliant striker in Jimenez and players like Neves and Moutinho, and obviously Traore came on as well. I know they were at Podenza on Saturday, but real quality attacking options and didn't offer anything really. Certainly nothing comparable to what Norwich carved out. Then ultimately, if you came in with one of our top priorities is to make us much harder to play against and limit the amount of opposition chances, then there's no doubt that they've achieved that. First half, Southampton clearly wasn't the case, but then they saw the way that game was going and they made those changes tactically, and obviously the personnel change, Cantwell off, Sargent on. second half against Southampton. I don't think there was too much really, again, that troubled Tim Krul. So we've now seen, again, small sample I know, but a game and a half where Norwich tactically have been excellent in terms of limiting the opposition. Because as Dean Smith keeps saying, he said it again today, he's looked at the squad and he can see they've got good players, they've got good technical players, they're good on the ball, they will create chances. So it's almost like, I'm not accepting that as a given, and I don't have to work on that because clearly they do, as we've talked about a little bit earlier, converting those chances. But I think he felt that they've got those attributes and we can work with those and we can add to those. But what we really badly needed to do was address the amount of chances they were coughing up. And I think a lot of the focus through Shakespeare, mainly, clearly, on the training pitch at Colney for the last 2 weeks or so, has been basically limiting the opponents. And as I say, you can only go on the last game, and they did that superbly. So, yeah, ultimately, if they can maintain that, and that's only going to, that understanding of what the players understanding what Shakespeare and Smith want from them is only going to grow week to week, really. So I think it's only going to get better, that aspect of, putting a team on the pitch who not only can score goals, but can they limit the opponents from scoring as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to go for a few more of your comments, Alex, just to be clear on Kabak, would there be a chance that he could return to Schalke in January, or is he here till the end of the season? These loans tend to work window to window and reviewed there. Of course, Norwich do have the option to make it permanent at the end of the season, although that is probably based on one, Premier League survival, and two, obviously now Dean Smith's judgment of him and whether he'd like to activate that deal. So could be something they review in January. We're expecting a quiet January. Stuart Webber said at the AGM recently he's expecting a quiet January. But if they were to play around with those loan slots and we get to January and Ozan Kabak still hasn't featured in the matchday squad, maybe that's one way of maybe adding someone to the squad and playing around with their options in the market a little bit. Jonathan Parker picks up on the point that you said, Paddy. He said he talks about restricting opposition players' chances. It'll be interesting to see how we combat Alan St. Maximin tomorrow. They did face Adama Traore on Saturday, who is not like for like, but quite a similar player in terms of how he wants to attack teams, maybe a little bit more erratic in terms of his final decision than St. Maximin. But there was an interesting snippet from Dean Smith today about how when Traore came on for that 25 minutes, they didn't let him into their box with the ball, which is, as you point out, defensively a major step forward. And we didn't really see too much of him. So that probably points maybe to Norwich's work. So if they can achieve a similar thing tomorrow with St. Maximin, who's caused absolute chaos before, he did in the friendly, didn't he? For example, then that could be they could be well on their way to getting a result against Newcastle. Let's see what else we have got. Hunting for profit. Matt here. Newcastle seem very gun-ho on the break. They lack balance. When they do have bodies in there defensively, they sit off their opponent. Can we exploit that tactically, do you think? I think it feeds into everything we've been saying, it doesn't it, Pad, about Rashica and pressing high and restricting their opportunities, as you say. I mean, we saw bits of the game against Arsenal at the weekend. It was kind of above us as we were working away before the game, but it did seem, particularly the middle, quite muddled, and I guess that's to be expected with Eddie Howe having arrived and then being out of the equation for 10 days or so, and then coming back in and then having 2 games in that period. They haven't won a game. Confidence is low. There's lots of opportunities for Norwich to exploit tomorrow.
Yeah, and it's worth reiterating, they are without the suspended Lascelles, and much as you could pick out influential players in the Norwich mix, he whatever you think about him in terms of a quality of a defender, he is very influential in that Norwich backline. That Newcastle backline, and to take him out, I think is definitely a positive for Norwich. But yeah, they need to get the other side of the Shelbys and the Willocks in terms of the Gilmore, McLean. If it's to be Rupp, that triumvirate, if they can feed balls through the lines past those, then all day long, Rashica, Pukki, if it's to be Sargent on the other side, flanked by Aarons and Brandon Williams when they're able to go and engage. I think there's joy to be had for Norwich against that Newcastle defensive 3, if it is minus Lascelles. And ultimately, we've just referenced him there. I think the only danger that I can see is Sam Maximin in the mood, because if he is, that's a hell of a player to have running at you. And I guess you ultimately need to stop him at source, because once he squares up a one-on-one, then the danger signs are there. So Callum Wilson, he's been leading the line. Yes, he'll score you a goal, but I think his best days are behind him. Famous last words when he rattles in a hat-trick tomorrow night. But and he's a Cov lad as well. So, I'd like to see him doing well, apart from tomorrow night. But I really just looking at their personnel this morning and the formation they might go with. There's nothing there that would unduly alarm you. It isn't. Let's be honest, and the league table tells you it isn't a Liverpool, it isn't a Man City or an Arsenal, even a Leicester kind of opposition they might be playing in terms of the quality of individual player. So if Norwich remain as organised as they have been in these first two games in the Smith, I think there's definitely on maybe on the counter if Newcastle are going to maybe shade possession. I think there's plenty of joy to be had. And again, we don't want to keep labouring the point, but Rashica could be the one to unlock the door tomorrow night, I think.
Yeah, just putting some money on Callum Wilson, first goal scorer for tomorrow after that statement. But yeah, you're right. It's going to be interesting to see a few more comments. Then we'll wrap up in the next few minutes or so. Hamish has said, can see us setting up a little differently tomorrow. Newcastle will come at us, can see us being a bit more counter-attacking and defensive. Dean Smith was asked about that today, about whether a Dean Smith Norwich City side away from home is slightly different to at home to playing at Carrow Road, and he said not dramatically, but of course there's extra elements to add in. The fact, and he mentioned it a few times, quietening down the partisan crowd, which you do get at St James's Park. But equally, he also stressed the need to be tough to beat and to be defensively organised. So again, maybe a bit more Norwich City soaking up pressure, but then they do have the dynamic players on the break. We mentioned one of them earlier on, Rashica, Pukki, Sholis, if he comes on, Josh Sargent, he's a player who really strives when running, essentially. So that could be something that could suit Norwich. So I wouldn't completely rule it out. Rosa, again, with an interesting comment. Do you think Newcastle will revert back to the 3-4-3 that they did against Brentford rather than the 4-4-2 against Newcastle? At Bournemouth, Eddie Howe seemed to always play 4-4-2. I guess the interesting element in both of those formations is that Norwich would have one more player in the central area, which is why they got so much joy against Wolves in that second half, because they had a numerical advantage. So that's an interesting one to watch as well. Given it's a home, given they're without Lascelles, I could see them reverting back to a 4-4-2 if I'm being honest. Yeah, Stephen's pointed out five hours behind, so there you go. It's not quite breakfast, is it? I don't think. No, maybe it is. Who knows? I think we will probably just about leave it there. Pad, thank you very much for joining me. Lastly, I suppose before we do sign off, we've got over 24 hours before the game starts, so your optimism might be an all-time high or an all-time low. But how do you see this? How do you see this one going? As I said, Callum Wilson, first goal scorer. That's nailed on now, given your statement earlier on.
Yeah,
beyond that, how do you see it going?
I'm regretting that statement already. I honestly. Yeah, I mean, you're kind of trying to, it's like you're stacking up the factors and the variables in play here as you look at it. And bar it being, the whole Eddie Howe first game and new ownership, whether there'll be anybody from the new ownership present at St. James, I don't know. But just that sense that it isn't Ashley and the doom and gloom that was associated with that era, those Newcastle fans are going to turn up. And I know it didn't quite go to plan in the Brentford game, 3-3, but obviously Eddie Howe wasn't available due to his COVID diagnosis. So it probably feels like tomorrow night is the first home beginnings of the Howe era. And if he can get the players to buy into that, who will obviously be keen to impress him, and they start really positively. And as much as we've talked and Dean Smith talked about, it's quiet in the crowd. If it did go the other way and they get their noses in front, then it's an extremely hard assignment for Norwich, because, the positivity that will be rolling around St. James's then will be very hard to sort of dampen down if they get their noses in front and their tails up. So I guess it just comes down to if Norwich can keep in the game as long as possible, turn that positivity to frustration on the terraces, then, there's something there for Norwich. But I think they're just going to have to be very, very good in that first 45, because if they get to half time on level terms or even better, then I think they'll go on and they will come back with something in terms of additions to the points counter. But if Newcastle get their noses in front, Stephen's going for a 2-1 Norwich. If Newcastle get their noses in front, I could see it being a very long night. But I'm going to sit on the fence, having basically flagged up all three potential results, and I'll end with a draw, because things are feeling very positive. There does feel like there's a belief amongst those players, and they haven't had it all their own way. Certainly Southampton first half, that was a lot of adversity to weather and come through. Wolves less so, but certainly in the first 20, 25 minutes when Neves and Moutinho were pulling the strings, that was a little bit uncomfortable. But allied to Shakespeare and Smith making a few tweaks, getting a few instructions on. They came through that as well. So I think you have to look positively and think if they do have some adversity, they'll come through that and they'll be able to keep this unbeaten run going. So I'm going to plump for a draw, Connor. What about you, my man?
Yeah, I'm probably with you, to be honest. I think it's a really fascinating test for Dean Smith and Craig Shakespeare. They, of course, have already recorded a win over Newcastle this season for Aston Villa. That was a 2-0 victory. That was under Steve Bruce and the old ownership at Newcastle, though certainly less optimism in the air. But this is a really interesting test. For me, it comes down to, as I said earlier, how well they can manage the game, manage that first period when there's going to be an inevitable onslaught. Can they keep themselves in the game during that? Then can they get a foothold in the game? Then can they maybe add a goal to that or whatever? But ultimately, I think it's one of those games where for both sides, it'll probably be more about avoiding defeat than trying to get a win. But if Norwich can get a win, then that would be absolutely massive, wouldn't it, in the context of their season, in the context to this run of form that we're talking about. So let's hope that Dean Smith can make it 2 from 2 against Newcastle this season. Thank you all very much for watching. Thank you all very much for your comments. Pinkin.com, of course, the place to go. We're all going to be at St James's Park tomorrow. We've got that long journey up. Probably around this time tomorrow, we'll be on the road. So that's going to be interesting in itself. Full match coverage there, of course. We've got Dean Smith's press conference, pre-match press conference on our YouTube channel as well. So that's well worth checking out. Plenty more for you across the day as well. Enjoy the rest of your Monday afternoons, and we'll see you again very, very soon. Thanks for watching.